I'm Jewish. My mother was a German Jew, grew up with her parents in Frankfurt in Germany, and they left Germany in 1938, just weeks before Kristallnacht. And so my grandfather was steadfastly saying he was a prominent doctor in Frankfurt in practice with a Gentile. And all the way through the 1930s, he said, it's not going to happen to us, it's not going to happen to us, it's not going to happen to us. Eventually, my grandmother nagged him into fleeing. And my grandparents and my mother ended up as refugees in Africa, in the little country of Swaziland. And that was where my mother grew up. She became a doctor. She married a white South African guy who was Catholic. So I grew up Jewish and Catholic. I had double the guilt. Then my father was not a particularly religious man. He fought as a mercenary in Africa. He smuggled emeralds, he smuggled diamonds. He ended up in jail when I was a teenager. My parents divorced. So I grew up in the context of being a child of refugees from the Holocaust. But then in all the turmoil of Africa, the civil war in Rhodesia, lots of violence, lots of what the psychologists euphemistically call adverse childhood experiences. But when I was 15, I had an encounter with Jesus. And changed my life. And what happened, it's a long story and I won't go into it, but what happened then was that Jesus, for the first time in my life, took God from being a distant, uninvolved being who'd abandoned my family and my Jewish community in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, who hadn't been there through the violence and the trauma of my childhood and in all of that heartache, and who I didn't think would ever really care for me, and I thought I was never really good enough. And in May 1985, Jesus came into my life and transformed me with the most extraordinary experience of being loved, and it changed my life. So, as a little Jewish boy with a Catholic dad, I came to faith, and it made all the difference. And I realized Jesus was the Messiah that we had been looking for and longing for, and he was the hope of the world. So, fast forward many years, I studied medicine, and then God called me to the ministry, and then I ended up in Sydney, and I've been pastoring churches for 30 years, and then October the 7th happened. As you all know, as Pastor Joe said, October the 7th, the single greatest tragedy to happen to the Jewish people since the Holocaust. But my life, our life, changed on October the 9th. And you go, is that because you're a slow learner? No. You see, what happened on October the 9th, less than 48 hours after the invasion of Israel by the terrorist, murdering rapists of Gaza, less than 48 hours, Freya, who is studying at the University of Sydney, called me and said, Dad, you'll never guess what, there's a pro-Palestine, anti-Israel rally planned for the center of Sydney. We've got to do something. So the police in Sydney had warned the Jewish community to stay out of the city because they weren't safe. I phoned them and I said, listen, I'm a pastor, I'm an Anglican, I'm a Jew, I want to come down and protest against the protest because it's not right. And the police said to me, Mr. Leach, if you come into the city, we will arrest you for your own safety. And I thought to myself, that's not right. So I went down, and there were 1,000 people gathered in the center of Sydney chanting their slogans, calling for the eradication of the state of Israel, for the ethnic cleansing of all the Jews from the Middle East. And I listened to the hatred, the satanic hatred that was filling that, and I thought, the ghosts of pogroms past, the evil of 1930s Germany is stalking the streets of Sydney, and they're here in Sydney, and I thought we cannot allow this to go unnoticed. So I play a bit of squash. given up on cricket, and I had my squash bag hidden from the police. I had an Israeli flag in it. So I stood on the side of the protest and I pulled out a big Israeli flag, and I stood and I waved the flag and I said, I will stand here with Israel, with the Jewish people, and I will not let hatred go unchallenged and unchecked in the heart of our city of Sydney. And so I had 1,000 eyes follow me and all the media camera, and then a bunch of thugs wrapped in keffirs chased me down the streets of Sydney, threatening to slit my throat. Eventually I hid behind a police van, and the rest is history. So fast forward out of that, a group of us said, we need to mobilize the church to stand against this most ancient of hatreds, to say to the Jewish people, we as the followers of the Jew, Jesus, will not let harm come to you. So we organized this movement called Never Again Is Now. Because out of the Holocaust, all the Jewish people, all the communities of Europe said, we must make sure that never again does the Holocaust happen. And what I saw after October the 7th, less than 48 hours after the greatest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, before the blood on the sands of southern Israel had dried, while they were still chasing terrorists around southern Israel, there were people calling for the Holocaust version 2 to happen again. And we said, no, now is the time to make sure that never again is never again. So never again is now.